Hello YouTube. Let me ask you one question, especially if you are a martial artist or you're in doing self-defense. Or even though not, you might be into doing sports, doing the sports aspect of martial arts. How do you know if your training method is correct? And if you do know, why would other training methods be wrong? Now before you answer that, before you pause this video and leave a comment, before you even make a video response, hear me out. I started martial arts unknowingly so, out of self-defense, and it wasn't even me who entered martial arts. It was my parents who, because of dire need, because of the place that we lived in before, a few years back. It was a really dangerous place, especially if you're an expatriate. If you're not a local there, chances are you're going to be abused, you're going to be maltreated, and locals can do anything nasty to you, especially if you're alone on the street, or even though if you're with other friends from school, since I was high school back then. So they signed me up into martial arts, me and my brother, thinking that it would be best for both of us to know how to do self-defense, how to defend ourselves in case worst case scenario arises. So I studied my first martial art, which was Okinawan Shorin-ryu Karate. And now that I know what family lineage I studied in, it is Shidokan. Shidokan is basically an Okinawan discipline where you don't really concentrate too much on deep stances. You walk as you can normally walk on the streets. You stand as you normally stand. So it's very mobile, very kung fu-like, because we concentrate more on the cat stance, as opposed to other karate disciplines like Shotokan, which concentrates on deep stances, like the front stance. And in doing so, I didn't think that it would help me in defending myself at first. I thought that the training methods that I was practicing or that I was going into were completely useless. I mean, why would you do a whole lot of stretching? Why would you do a whole lot of strength training? Push-ups, sit-ups, around 50 of those. And why would you hit someone 1 centimeter away from the body? So you just stop once you extend your arm, for example, and you hit their clothes, and then you just let the other person walk, even though they know that they're not going to be hit. I mean, why would you do that? It's not even realistic. From that scenario alone, from that single scenario alone, I've thought of a lot of ways, a lot of nasty, dirty ways in order to put my sparring partner down, to make it more realistic, to make it more effective. As it turns out, it wasn't true. And you know that drills are just practices. And even though it was just a practice, I still could not accept that the way you practice should reflect the way you're going to do things in real life. That was my analogy, or should I say, my saying before. And what happened was, I was almost completely right, because a few years after, when I attended the Muay Thai class / self-defense class here, everything that I did during the drill, I applied it in sparring, and it was horrible. Completely, should I say, destroyed. I was being picked from every single action that I did. I froze on every single technique. So once I did a technique, I stopped there, and then I think after a second or two, that's the only time I'm going to get back on my normal stance, normal fighting stance. Whereas my sparring partner would have already clocked me in the head if it were a real fight, or if it were a real competition. But there's a positive thing that I actually did from when I was starting practicing martial arts. I actually had my mind open slowly to a lot of training methods that I thought were useless, but as I begin to see, as I begin to progress, I can see where those training methods would lead me to. And one of the biggest gripes I had that really makes me raise one of my eyebrows was that if you're practicing martial arts, if you're practicing self-defense, why would you study watching martial arts techniques in movies and in video games? Which I still do until now. Well, I'll continually do that, I think. Because my reason would be, you're not always given the opportunity to see other techniques in the discipline that you're in, unless you see other disciplines themselves. And one of the great ways that you can do that is to attend a lot of seminars, a lot of demonstrations. But I really don't have time to do that, especially as a student. So what would be the easiest way? Watch movies, action flicks, martial arts movies, and watch video game clips, or at least play the video games themselves to see the martial art move that you want to practice. Will imitate and practicing the martial arts techniques that you watch from movies and video games really help you as a martial artist when it comes to training? How realistic could those techniques be? How would they be when applied to real life? First off, you have to use critical thinking here. Not all fancy flying kicks are effective in the streets. Not all body slams would really help you out of the situation. Not all punches will knock opponents down. And not all situations are perfect. However, it's better to have that kind of technique and see the potential damage that you can do with it, as opposed to putting that technique aside and forever be forgotten. Just because you're in a different discipline, or let's say you're in a different family lineage, if you know the basics, if you can see the basics, if you can see the potential of certain technique that you're looking at, that you're watching, that you're observing, and it's completely different from yours, even though you already saw the basics, it doesn't mean that you should throw them out. You have to see, or you have to consider a lot of factors when it comes to criticizing a technique. You have to look at the body posture, you have to look at the proper body mechanics being applied to, you have to think of a lot of situations depending on how many scenarios you can think of. You should look at the body frame of the person of doing the technique. You should imagine what kind of people can have this technique and how it would work for them as opposed to other people that would not work with them. You should look at the experience of the person of doing the technique. And even though you disagree, you should be able to fully understand where that person came from. Take for example this. This is, I really don't know the name of this, but this is a lock that you use for weights. Say if you want to carry a weight, a cable machine that's 20 pounds for example. So you put this so-called block, the 20 pounds, and you carry the weight in doing the cable machine exercise. A lot of people will just look at this like what I said. As a martial artist, I can look at this as a weapon. I can actually use this as an improvised weapon, hold it in an ice pick grip, and do whatever I want with it. Because my experience helps me to use this as an improvised weapon of a knife or scissors, for example. I can do this. From this alone, a lot of people will say, you should not be able to do that. You should first sharpen the end so that it'll be a good improvised weapon. No, you should make the handle be better for your fingers because it's pure metal. You should wrap it with cloth or leather. You should not flip it around because it gives away of what you're going to do to your opponent. It's so telegraphic, it's so fancy. It really depends on your background. The only thing that I can do with those kinds of people is to explain my side on how I understood that technique, why it works, and be open on the cons that I forgot. But it's not actually defending myself. Because if I defend myself, I would be arrogant, and I would not actually accept all of the cons that the other party is telling me. So if you're having a discussion with that kind of person who just sees the negative side of it, but doesn't understand the advantages that you showed or that you're trying to explain, then it might be best to just keep silent from that. You've done your part doing the explanation, that's that. Maybe their background is entirely different, maybe their training method is entirely different, maybe their life experience changed their perspective about it. That's the reason why they see what they are telling you and are not agreeing with you. Going back to the first questions that I told you, maybe similar, but the point is still there. How do you know if your training method is correct? And if you do know, why would other training methods be entirely wrong?